Okay, so here's the formality. Welcome to New York Buddha Dharma. My name is John Baker, and we are working our way week by week through Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche's The Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma. It's a 3-volume work that is a compilation of talks he gave over 13 years at what was called Vajradhatu Seminary. It was a 3-month program each year, and he took anywhere from 100 to 250 students away for those 3 months, and they would do a lot of meditation practice, and they would hear talks by him and by other teachers that he had authorized of his students. And the talks that he gave have been edited and compiled into these 3 volumes. We're on the first volume, and we're on the second section, which has to do with discipline, the principle of discipline in the practice. And we're on chapter 16, which is entitled The Loneliness and Joy of Discipline. Okay. So the real meaning of discipline, the Tibetan word is dulwa, and it means discipline, but it also has the fundamental meaning of taming the mind. And the way in which we tame the mind, you see, is by doing the practice that we just did, of coming back to the present moment. Until we do that, we are in a struggle with our thoughts. But increasingly, as we do this practice of coming back and resting in the present moment, if one does it regularly and with understanding, thoughts will subside, and one will begin to rest more and more in this awareness of the present moment, in this awareness of this space, which is very relaxing. And it has a number of properties, that awareness. One of them, these are summed up. We just did a retreat at the Westchester Buddhist Center based on the 4 foundations of mindfulness, as Trungpa Rinpoche told them. He gave a very Dzogchen, great perfection version of the 4 foundations. And the first one is simple. It's called awareness of the body. And that means rest. This is the body. It's all the body. This, the present moment, everything that constitutes our presence. And the first principle is to come back to awareness of this and rest here. We're often thought, we're dreaming about tomorrow, yesterday, our lover, our enemy, our meal, and then we wake up, something wakes us, and we come back, and here we are in this space lit with phenomena. The second principle is, which is a very interesting one, is that this present space has the quality of well-being. That when we come back to it, there's a warmth of well-being. It's in contrast to the nastiness of our thoughts. Our thoughts are all about unhappiness and happiness and getting and a feeling of poverty and a wanting more, of wanting something different. And when we come back into this present moment, we're freed from that. We're released from that feeling of wanting things to be different. And so what the teachings say is that this present moment, the second foundation, has this quality of well-being, that it's health, it's fundamental health. The health of our mind, the health of our bodies, all of it is contained in coming back to this present moment. And in doing this, coming back to the present, again and again, slowly, we begin to shift our allegiance. Now, some people can do it very fast. There are no rules to this. For most, it's a gradual path. But for some, it can be instantaneous. They just recognize that the present moment, this, is what is real. Mental events that arise and pass away in our minds, thoughts, emotions, memories, feelings of all kinds, have these two fundamental qualities. They are temporary, they come and go, and they are delusory. We think that they're everything, but they're not. The metaphor that's used often in the teachings, there are many metaphors for this, but the one that I particularly like, it's an ancient one, is of the sky and clouds. The sky is our mind. It's always there, the blue sky. It never goes away. And the clouds are the mental events. They come across the sky. Sometimes they're very small, and we just see this mental event, and we're still here in the big sky. Other times, they completely cover the sky, and you can't see it. That's when we can get completely lost in a thought. But nonetheless, they pass. They are temporary, and they are not true. This is what's true. And so really we're shifting our allegiance to this. When we do that, a number of things happen. One is that we can't be fooled by the delusory quality of thoughts. We become much smarter. This is called the development of prajna, of transcendent wisdom. Another is that we become much calmer, much more even-keeled, as it were, because we're able to rest in our fundamental nature more and more. It comes slowly, gradually for most of us. It's a gentle and ongoing deepening of shifting our allegiance from these delusory, temporary thoughts, mental events, to the fundamental, real mind, or what this author, his name is Orgyen Choang, calls pristine mind. And pristine mind is simply a translation of the Tibetan term yeshe, which is another name for fundamental mind. Yeshe literally means pristine or primordial knowing. She is knowing, and ye is pristine or primordial. And it's this. We're sitting in the middle of it. So the vinaya, that is the word vinaya is discipline. It means the code of conduct in the Hinayana teachings. And really what it means is taming the mind. Taming it how? Taming it by bringing it back out of these crazy thoughts that we have, which take us off on journeys of hope and fear and aggression of all kinds, and bringing it back to rest in this present space. When we do that, Rinpoche says that what produces this kind of discipline is fundamental sanity. And that's really what comes from dwelling in this present mind. He says that it's pragmatic, precise, and realistic. The essence of Hinayana discipline is that one's mind is in the right place. This is the right place, right here. It's this present moment, this space of now, rather than being caught up with thoughts, mental events. And it's in its own place, mind being in its own place, the place where it is now, this very moment. That's a quote from Trungpa Rinpoche. That's the fundamental discipline. Then he goes on to talk about how it has two categories being in its right place. One is one-pointedness. We're always one-pointed. We're one-pointed on whatever is in our consciousness. It's just that when we get lost in dreams, we lose track of it. We're all lost in a story, and we become a dream walker in our own story. And the second aspect is that it has a discriminating awareness, that we can discriminate between dream and reality, and that we can see what's true. Then the second topic of this chapter is almost a non sequitur, but not quite. He talks about the power of loneliness. And he says, there's this quote, "The point is that you cannot develop yourself properly unless you give up your need for companionship. Once you give up your search for companionship, you can make friends with your loneliness. At that point, you become a genuine practitioner. And what he's talking about here is that, a lot of us, when you're alone, you feel this emptiness, this sorrow, a feeling of a need to find somebody to assuage your loneliness, to fill that feeling of emptiness and fear maybe of being alone. And what happens, the real cure for that, so what we do, the way we normally do it, what most people do is you go out and you try and find some friends to go to the movies with, or have a love affair with, or go to dinner with, or have a conversation with, to assuage that feeling of that empty loneliness, especially when you live alone, as many of us do, and you come back to a lonely apartment, and you come into that apartment and it's dark, and there's that feeling of being alone, and you want some companionship. And so you turn on the lights, and maybe you turn on the TV, to get a feeling of somebody out there. And then it's hard to turn the TV off, because when you do, there's this silence. And I'm describing my own experience. But the real cure for it, the real cure is not that, not looking for a companion. It's in coming back to this basic, pristine mind. When you do that, then there is no sense of sorrow. Then you discover the real power of genuine aloneness and the virtue of loneliness, because there's no sorrow in it. There's no feeling of lack. You come back to this present moment and you rest in it, and you begin to switch your allegiance back to this. He says, unless you have a sense of aloneness, you cannot develop wakefulness. So it is absolutely and utterly important and necessary to feel lonely, to the extreme, he says. Because that is what will motivate you to actually practice and to come back to this present moment. The sorrow of that looking for a companion. It's like we want a mirror image. We want somebody out there to say, you're there, you're there, you're there. If you remember back in the 60s, people did experiments with sensory deprivation. You might not remember this. It was a big psychedelic thing. People would take LSD and get into a sensory deprivation tank where they would try to remove all sensory stimuli. Hard to do. Sound, sight, and any kind of sense of touch. They'd be floating in some kind of liquid. No temperature change, your body temperature. And the idea is that people would get freaked out because they wouldn't have something to relate to, something that out there that says, I'm here. Well, what we're doing is we're giving that up when we come back into the present moment, and we are resting in this fundamental knowingness of mind that isn't looking for an I-other relationship. He says loneliness causes people to go out there and look for God. This is a very Buddhist thing to say. Yeah. And compose, then he says, and compose music and do all kinds of things like, create art. And it can be a sort of a bad motivation for doing acts of creation, because you are doing it to fill the void of your loneliness. But the good way is when you come back into this present moment, then you can find genuine inspiration to create art of all kinds. The inspiration comes out of this sense of well-being, which only grows. That sense of well-being can grow into a real feeling of joy, of happiness, and of the ability to be present and to be intelligent and to be creative in one's presence in the moment. He says, with half-hearted loneliness, you are still looking for entertainment. The whole thing becomes hollow and fruitless. Some people, stuck in that kind of half-hearted loneliness, try to kill themselves because they're so lonely. But in this case, in the case of the Dharma, we take loneliness as the path. With loneliness, there is a path. And he says you can be lonely in society with people all around. And that simply means that instead of sort of being hungry, for contact in a crowd, that one simply rests here in the present moment and relates with whoever is here in an appropriate way. And in that way, your mind, as you rest in the present, is no different when you're in a crowd than when you're at home. It's just simply present, relaxed here. I think that's all I'm going to say on this subject. And we could have a discussion. If you like. And we have a microphone that we're going to pass. Right? Do you know how to turn it on? Thanks. Joe.
Yeah. Maybe it's just my skull or what, but for me, for my head, maybe it's just my head. Skull. But for me, there's a big difference between alone and lonely. And that's why I wanted to go back again to read the chapter a second time, because I was having difficulty. I couldn't see where they were differentiating between loneliness and aloneness. They're very two different things for me.
They are.
But it seems in the reading, it's the same thing.
He goes back and forth.
Yeah.
I think for our purposes, loneliness involves a kind of complaint, an unhappiness.
It's a wanting.
A wantingness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And aloneness, one could actually revel in one's aloneness.
Right. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just me. Okay.
But the way you revel in it is this feeling of competence, of that you can do this, that you can actually be alone without being wanting, without being wanting, have this wantingness, this poverty, that you can actually sort of revel in it. And then there's little difference between whether there are people here or whether there are not.
Yeah. Lonely is a very lonely word.
It is. Yeah. But you see, I forgot, I wanted to bring this. Ultimately, in the path, this path is a very lonely path. It's, we're born alone. We come out of the womb alone. When we die alone. Can't take any friends or relatives with us. And ultimately, our enlightenment and our path and our working on ourselves is alone. You can get help from a friend. Your spiritual friend, your other friends can give you a nudge. But ultimately, each one of us has to do it completely alone. That's the only way it happens. Nobody can be in there, in our skulls, with us on this path. And so this thing it's really beautiful, this idea that we could, when you come into the present moment again and again, you do it on your meditation cushion, and you do it in daily life. And slowly, slowly you switch your allegiance from that wantingness to resting here in the present moment. This is why it's very important. I see some people here meditating with their eyes closed. And I really recommend you meditate with your eyes open. And the reason is, the purpose of meditating with the eyes closed, it's very good practice to do for beginning practice. When you're working on calming your mind, coming out of thought into a calmer state, beginning to develop the ability to discriminate between being aware in the present moment of whatever it is, your breath, and being lost in thought. And then it's good to practice having your eyes closed. But ultimately, we want to have our eyes open because we are learning how to rest in the present moment of this world as we walk through it. And then we can take our practice out on the street in conversation with people all the time. We can begin to become Buddhas. The Buddha was awake all the time. And that's what we're practicing in our limited ways, or not so. So I really recommend eyes open. In the Buddhist tradition, once you get past sort of that beginning stage of meditation, all the practices are done, all the Vipassana practice and beyond, Mahamudra, Dzogchen, Shunyata, are done with the eyes open. Also, it helps you stay awake better.
I find that it all depends on how tidy my room is when I'm meditating also. If the room is a mess, it's a distraction to me if I'm meditating with my eyes open. So I either have to clean the room straighten out the room before I do it, or close my eyes, one or the other.
That's a great practice. Meditate with your room really messy. And just let your mind rest there. No judgment, no good and bad. Just include it all.
It's very tricky.
That is a good practice. Yeah. And then when thoughts arise, like anger towards somebody or sorrow, you include that too. It's another messy thought, just like those socks lying in the corner.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That's good practice.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. What do you think, Alan?
It's an intriguing thought.
It's a what?
Intriguing thought.
Intriguing thought. Okay. Nothing more? Okay. Lane. No. I've got more batteries if we need them.
Great. Okay. Yeah, just a comment that I really appreciate the word taming rather than discipline, because the word tame implies that you put care into what you're taming, whereas discipline implies a strictness. So maybe you could say a little bit more about that, because I think it's rather important.
Well, discipline is just an English translation of the Sanskrit or the Tibetan or whatever you've got, Pali, in the Theravada tradition. And the term in Sanskrit is Vinaya, and the term in Tibetan is Dulwa. And Trungpa Rinpoche preferred to translate them taming. He felt that it was a better translation than discipline, although he uses discipline too, because discipline's the traditional translation of that. But they
translated as what?
He preferred taming.
Oh, taming.
Taming. Because the idea is that what we're doing is we're taming. Oh, good, thank you. This neurotic. Our neurotic minds, which are they're flying from one anxious, sorrowful, angry, passionate thought to the next. And we're taming it by bringing it back into the present moment and letting it relax here. It's like cool balm, when we come back to the present. So I like the word taming too. But you always have to remember with the English translations, a lot of them are bad. The word enlightenment comes from a long tradition of Western culture, out of the Enlightenment period in Europe. And in fact, the word is bodhi in Sanskrit, and changchup in Tibetan. And it means awakening. The Buddha was the awakened one, Buddha. Awakened from what? From the dreams that are contained in all these mental events. He awakened to this open, big, pristine mind of the present moment. And he lived in it all the time, because he had shifted his loyalty, or he had just awakened and realized what's real.
There is a very traditional picture of a dragon chasing a fireball. So dragons are always chasing and the ball's always flying. So it's like the taming the dragon is when the dragon catch that ball and everything just calm down. So our mind is like the dragons always flying and so you have to meet that point when dragon catch that fireball that's flying in the sky, in all different directions. Yeah, so that's the samadhi.
Right. That's a good analogy. The analogy that you most often find, you see, in the Buddhist teachings, they talk about two different minds. In the Zen tradition, it's big mind, little mind, in the Soto Zen tradition. In the Tibetan tradition, they talk about primordial or pristine mind and ordinary mind. It's yeshe and sem. And ordinary mind is the mind of mental events. It's uncontrollable, it's jumpy, it's full of passion and klesha, which means defilements, the poisons, the passions. Big mind is the mind of enlightenment. It's calm, it's serene, it's always there. You can't catch it because you're already in it. You already got it. It's what we all fundamentally are at our core. And it's a matter of, it's like a figure ground problem. You take, I remember this, I keep thinking about Trungpa Rinpoche when he gave a particular teaching to some students at CU. He went up to the blackboard and he drew a stick picture with a piece of chalk of a bird. And he asked, "What's that a picture of?" And of course nobody wanted to say the obvious, and finally one student did. And the student said, "It's a picture of a bird." And he said, "It's a picture of the sky." And that's what happens to us. We get focused on the foreground, on the figure, and we lose track of the ground. The ground is our big mind, our pristine mind. It's always there. It's like the blue sky. We get focused on the little mind, the clouds that go across it. And we forget about the big mind. And we get caught up in these mental events which are so painful and full of suffering. And really what the whole path is about beginning to shift our loyalty from those stories into the world of the big mind, of the real world. Marie.
When we're talking about taming and discipline, are we referring only to the practice, taming mind while we're practicing, or is it in a daily life? For example, while we're eating, not to overeat, or other addictions like cigarette or internet games or whatever it is. Like how to control or tame our mind and ourselves in these situations. How we have to deal with it.
Yeah, well, the main thing is to begin to see it, to see what the issue is. Because you see, as long as our loyalty is to our thoughts, there's always this feeling within the thoughts of insufficiency. And so we come up with entertainments of all kinds to try and fill that void that we feel, that hunger. We play computer games, we go eat too much, we smoke cigarettes, we go drink alcohol, we do all kinds of things.
Eat chocolate.
Eat chocolate. Well, if you can do all these things sanely, I think. Maybe there's some you can't, I don't know. But the main point is to come back from being lost in that dream of all the main quality of the dream. This is what the Buddha taught, the first noble truth, the truth of suffering. And the main quality of suffering is you want to make it better. You don't like the way it is. You want to make it better. That's what always drives thought. You want to hold, if you've got it, you want to hold on to it. You're afraid it's going to slip away. So you want to change the way things are in the future and avoid unpleasantness in the past. That's the main quality. And that drives us into all kinds of neurotic behaviors. Being lost in computer games, overreading, taking, drugs and abusing substances and just filling ourselves up with busyness. Busyness, that's a good one. I remember Zongso Khyentse Rinpoche talking about busyness as being an evil. It's a big deterrent to progressing on the path. It's because it's a way that we keep that thinking little mind busy to try and assuage our anxiety. Yes? Alan?
When you're talking about doing something sanely, is that the same as doing it consciously?
Insanely?
Yeah. I remember someone asked Rinpoche, are you saying that it's not good to have a fantasy? And he said, well, as long as you know you're having a fantasy, that's okay. So that seems to, that suggests to me consciously knowing, for example, as an act of, let's say, imagination. You're imagining something. So that would be consciously leaving for a moment the present and doing, maybe imagining a scene from a play or who knows what. So sanely and consciously sound pretty much the same to me. What do you think?
What was the last part?
Sanely and consciously seem pretty much the same to me. What do you think?
What do I think?
Yeah.
I think that a lot of what we create in fantasy, fiction, if we're writing a short story, a play, a movie, is a paradigm of neurotic thought. In other words, neurotic thought is always based on a hero, me, hero or heroine, who is pursuing an object of desire. This is the classic structure of all fiction, it's a three-act story structure, which is one of the fundamental ones, and then the hero or the heroine is on an arc towards the object of desire. And the big tension is, will the hero or the heroine get the object of desire, or will they not? And if they do, then your story has an up ending, and if they don't, then your story has a down ending. Now, Hollywood likes up endings, and because down endings don't sell as well. And I once took a film seminar with a guy named Robert McKee, and he told the story of the creation of a movie called Seven. That's a very dark movie, very. And it was originally written with a very down ending. And when the people in Hollywood decided they wanted to make this movie, the producers, they went to the writer and they told him, you have to put an up ending on it, because down endings just don't sell as well, right? So they put the writer wrote an up ending. Then they cast it, and the people they had put in it were Morgan Freeman, Brad Pitt, and Gwyneth Paltrow. And when Brad Pitt read the script, he read the original script, and he liked the down ending. And what Brad Pitt says goes, and that movie was made with the down ending. Huh? It sure was. Huh? It was successful because it was just a terrific movie either way, except it was really hard to watch because it was so brutal. And it's dark, very dark. The funny thing is that a long time after that, I took that seminar, I was walking through Union Square one day, and there was one of these guys with a table selling movie scripts. Seen that? See that? So I went up to the table, and there it was, the script for Seven. And I thought, terrific. I bought it. I'm going to take it home. I'm going to read it. I'm going to really enjoy it, because that movie was taut. It was beautifully written. That's why people like it. Otherwise, it's just so gross that it's hard to even watch. But it's beautifully scripted. So I went home and I read it. I got to the end. It had the up ending. And I want to tell you, the upending was pretty good. It was really good. It was the guy was a terrific writer, whoever wrote that screenplay. But the thing is, you see that our little fantasies that we have in our minds, like, am I going to get a date tonight? Am I going to have a nice dinner tonight? Do I have enough money? How are my investments doing? That person said something mean to me. I don't like that person right now. You know, what am I going to do about that? All of those things are like little teeny pieces they're like embryonic versions of these movie scripts where we are the heroine and we're towards an object of desire. We want to get even with that person who hurt our feelings. We want to have a nice meal. We want to fall in love. You know, will we assuage our loneliness? They're like little bits and pieces that come and go from time to time. And it's like, instead of seeing one continuous movie, we see it in fragments. We see lots of movies at the same time. We just see a fragment of this one, and then there's a fragment of that one. We get distracted. Now we're worrying about our love life. Now we're worrying about dinner. Now we're worrying about our job. And then, but they all fit together. That's what movie writers do, and that's why they sell movies. Oops, press the button. So,
yes, are you saying that art is neurotic? You were describing basically all of, I mean, I don't know about non-Western literature, but all of Western literature.
I am.
And you're saying it's neurotic.
Right.
And that's it. You know, you're disposing it. You're just dropping it all in a neurotic bin. And you're kind of closing the bin and saying, forget about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a big question. There can be enormous inspiration and beauty just coming into the present moment. I mean, I think people like, you know, great creative artists saw things very much, you know, in the present. Were dwelling in their big mind. That's my guess.
I don't follow what you just said.
You know, Trungpa Rinpoche taught with Allen Ginsberg, and this is a good subject. This is difficult for me, and I think for you. He talked about first thought, best thought. You know, and with Allen. And did you ever see the works of art that Trungpa Rinpoche created? You know, like the movie, the Milarepa movie. They were very different than a Hollywood movie.
Well, I have a feeling that, you know, an honest depiction of one's own suffering, of one's own passion, is beautiful and moving, and it's humane and human.
I agree.
And it's not just neurotic.
How could we not agree?
I mean, it seems like you were saying before, you were describing everything from War and Peace to the current bestseller, from Shakespeare to, you know, you name whoever's writing now or ever. And you're just saying, well, that's all neurotic because it's about people who want things.
I don't like the word neurotic here, though. Go ahead.
People who want things and are disappointed and who feel pain and who are basically like us. But it seems to me you have to step outside of it to do it so beautifully. And because when
that's interesting.
We don't step outside. I think meditation is being able to step outside and seeing how we get lost in our wantingness. But if you're creating something, you're the observer, and you feel compassion for the characters you're depicting.
Right.
I mean, that's...
I think you're right. I think that's good. I like that, Alan.
So wouldn't it be safe to say that neurotic is not a good term for it, because we're thinking neurosis in the term of human suffering and psychology, and it does spawn some of the greatest artwork, and it is a positive thing for that sake. So maybe neurosis is not the right term for what you're describing.
I think it's context. But I like what Alan is saying. I mean, you could create a great work of art about extreme madness. right? A depiction of tremendous suffering and neuroticism. And the depiction of it could be very accurate, compassionate, beautiful, moving, artful. But the question then, what you seem to be saying is, how caught up are we in it? You know, have we woken? Are we in the dream, or are we viewing it from an awake place?
I think it brings in another aspect of practice, which you were mentioning at the beginning about seeing things clearly. That great art is about seeing things clearly and truthfully. And that's why they're great.
And with compassion, too.
And, you know, even if they're about bad endings, because it's seen with such clarity, and yes, compassion, you know, you see a great tragedy and you don't come out feeling depressed. There's almost a sense of exhilaration because it's so true. And there's beauty in that.
Yeah. Well said. Here's Peter.
I think it's on. Hello. I'm pushing the button. Hold it.
Hold it.
Hello, hello.
Push the button. I didn't. You have to hold it down. Oh, I see.
Okay.
Hi. Hello? You have to keep it pushed. Oh, you have to hold? Oh. Okay.
Yeah, I'm pushing. Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, now I forgot what I was going to say. I think we have to be very careful because not to label something as, well, neurotic, whatever, choose, because of its subject, because the art is not in the subject. The art is in the telling. That's where the art lies. You know, you can, I'm sure there's hundreds of examples that you know, if you isolate the subject, you say, well, that's very banal and everybody else has done it. So, but what makes a book or whatever transcendent is the gift of the creator of that narrator or viewer or direction or whatever of that subject. So I just think we need to be very careful there and not condemn something by its subject. Well, you yourself said, you know, 7 is not exactly an uplifting subject, but it's a wonderful film. So,
Indeed.
yeah.
Well said. Thank you.
I agree.
Thank you. So, yeah. So the message is practice. Yeah. Practice coming back into ordinary mind. Into this big mind. Okay, so we should end then, maybe, and we have some refreshments. Yes, we can end there.